morning and welcome to Village in Motion. I'm Marcia Boyles, and I'm really pleased and excited this morning to be introducing the topic of the history of Fairfax County and the fact that it is 275 years old. We are just so pleased today to have two guests from the Fairfax County government who will be talking about this. And let me begin by introducing our two guests, Mary Lipsey and Christopher Barbuschak. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Oh, excellent. Mary, tell us what you do in Fairfax County, and then Christopher, will you tell us what you do?
First of all, I don't work for the county. I'm a volunteer with the Fairfax.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I am with the Fairfax County History Commission, and that is an appointed commission by the county that works on various Fairfax County projects. Probably the one the public might recognize the most are the History Commission road markers along the highways. They're the blue and gold ones that tell you about the history of Fairfax County.
Oh yes, those are wonderful. Christopher?
I'm a librarian for Fairfax County Public Library. I work in the Virginia Room, which is the special collections for the library. We focus on local history and genealogy.
All right, well, I'm going to just turn it over to the two of you. You're going to talk about the fact that it was celebrated here in Fairfax County this year, the 275th anniversary. That is a big deal.
It was a big deal. All year long we've been celebrating in a variety of ways. We've celebrated with lectures, history lectures. We've celebrated with a play, the Fairfax musical, that was a history of Fairfax musical style. We've also done a photo exhibit. We partnered with Ollie, George Mason, and we've done a then and now photo exhibit of how Fairfax County looked back in the day and those same sites as how they look today. And our defining ultimate climactic event was on June 17th at the Fairfax Courthouse. We had a Fairfax County History Fair where all of our local history organizations came. They featured displays. We had reenactors. And in fact, we had Lord Fairfax himself came, the Nicholas Lord Fairfax, the 14th Lord Fairfax, and he came.
For heaven's sake, all the way from England.
All the way from England, yes, and it was a tremendous day.
Gosh, that sounds exciting.
One of the things we did on that day is also we dedicated a plaque to American Revolutionary soldiers from Fairfax County that died during the war, and there's a war memorial on the courthouse lawns. So we added a plaque to that, and one thing I wanted to say about Lord Fairfax, because we invited him to speak, and he said this is the first time he thought he'd ever been asked to speak about a defeat, because of course the British lost the colonies in the American Revolution. So it was a really exciting time period. The planning was 2.5 years in the making, and so we all are now catching our breath again from after this celebration.
And you'll be prepared after you catch your breath for the 300th.
That's right.
Well, we're leaving a legacy for them, so they know what we did and how we did it and things like that. So,
tell us a little bit about the background of Fairfax County.
Sure. Well, Fairfax County was founded June 19th, 1742. The General Assembly decided to carve out a portion of Prince William County, and it's Fairfax County today. We've lost a lot of small chunks of land of Fairfax County, what was Fairfax County in 1742. Arlington used to be part of Fairfax County. Alexandria was as well. For a period of time, it became part of D.C. And in 1801, 1802, it was given back, or 1840s, it was given back to Virginia and became the city of Alexandria. But it was named after Lord Fairfax, who is the proprietor, the Northern Neck proprietor. He eventually lived here in Fairfax County at Belvoir, which was not too far away from George Washington. He actually lived, they were neighbors, they were good friends. And Belvoir today actually is where Fort Belvoir is. And the house is no longer standing. It was burned sometime during the Revolutionary War, but the ruins are still there.
Amazing. So he owned much of the state of Virginia, didn't he? Something like 5.25 million acres all the way over to the mountains.
A very, very large chunk.
As I remember the history of it.
In fact, Lord Fairfax, when he came for the celebration, he had commented that his biggest regret is that 5 million acres of land that he once had in the family, that he would have made a killing with all that.
Yes,
today.
he would be a very, very wealthy
Yes,
man, wouldn't he?
yes.
Exactly. Okay. And my recollection, too, is that he went back to England during the war, during the Revolutionary War. He was not going to stick around
Yes.
when the Brits were being defeated. All right, so 1742 was when it became a county. And it is the most populous county. Is that still the case?
Yes, the most populous county
in Virginia.
Yes, yes. And it's also the third richest county in the United States, is what I've heard.
Yes. I think there was a time when it was claimed that it was the richest, but third sounds about right at this point. Okay, well, tell us you said you had some interesting stories about things that had happened in the past in Fairfax County. I can only imagine, I mean, this location must have been absolutely all kinds of things going on.
Well, a lot of people focus on the Civil War as its impact on the whole nation, and I want to talk a little bit about Anna Maria Fitzhugh, wife of William Fitzhugh, and it was his great-great-grandfather who owned 22,000 acres of Fairfax County, and he eventually, it was a tobacco plantation. He was an absentee landlord living in Stafford area, but his grandsons and great-grandsons built plantations in Fairfax County, including Ocean Hall, Ravensworth, and Oak Hill, which are in the Springfield and Annandale area. And
Do those still stand?
No, the Oak Hill still stands, but Ocean Hall and Ravensworth no longer stand. But Ravensworth was located, if you're familiar with the Ravensworth Shopping Center or Braddock Road and the Beltway, it generally was there, and it was a tobacco plantation for a long time. And the great-grandson, William Henry Fitzhugh, and Anna Maria lived there. He died early on at the age of 38, so she continued on at the plantation and also had a townhouse in Alexandria. He released all his slaves, and so she had tenants and farm managers and servants who lived with her. What's interesting is that her husband's niece was Mary Custis, which was the future Mrs. Robert.
Niece.
Yes, her husband's niece was Mary Custis, the future Mrs. Robert E. Lee. Anna Maria's best friend was Robert E. Lee's mother. So there's all these connections between the Fitzhugh and the Lee family. In fact, when Mary Custis and Robert E. Lee married, they came and honeymooned at Ravensworth. And on that fateful Sunday when Robert E. Lee finally decided to go for the Confederacy, he went to church with Anna Maria in Alexandria on that Sunday morning and mentioned nothing about it to her. And so she was very disappointed. I mean, she believed that he went towards Virginia, and that's why he did that. But she felt that the Confederacy was going to tear apart the nation, and it was going to destroy the nation. So she really did not feel like she was in favor of secession. But she moved back from Alexandria to Ravensworth to protect the family home. And so she stayed there the entire time of the Civil War by herself with servants. And together they managed an 8,000-acre plantation. One of the things she complained about was loneliness. She did somehow get the Alexandria Gazette, somehow, in the mail, I don't know how. She would send servants out with messages to neighbors, etc. But generally speaking, she was there by herself except for the first month of the war, because Mary Custis Lee, leaving Arlington Hall, which is we call the Custis Lee Mansion today, came to her aunt's house and stayed there. She did not want to leave her home, completely unprotected, but she knew she couldn't stay there, so she got as close as she could. Meanwhile, Lee is in Richmond, and he's sending letters to her, and he eventually tells her, you need to leave because you're going to bring, and he called Anna Maria his cousin. He said, you're going to bring her into danger. And so Mary Custis did leave and then spent a year, a vagabond year, going to various homes and friends and relatives in Virginia before finally arriving in Richmond 1 year after the war started. She just really did not want to be that far away from her home in Arlington. So Anna Maria survived the war. She even survived the death of Mary Custis, who had inherited Ravensworth. Her uncle gave it to her with Anna Maria being the guardian as long as she lived. And so once Mary Custis died and Anna Maria died, it went to the Lee children. And so when I moved into the Ravensworth community, we all knew about Mrs. Lee, who was a daughter-in-law many generations later, who lived in the community and had, maintained, because the house burned down, but they rebuilt a farmhouse over top of the Ravensworth plantation in 1926. So it's quite a heritage to think that the Lees and the Fitzhughs, and during the Civil War, Mrs. Fitzhugh talked about Jeb Stuart visiting her, Confederate officers visiting her, Union men on her property. So it was, constantly being visited by both sides, but neither one touched the house because of the connection to the Washington family and to the Lee family. So it's a really interesting.
Mary Custis was a member of the Washington family, wasn't she?
Yes, she was the great-great-granddaughter of George Washington. Yes, so.
So out of respect for that connection, was that why they didn't molest the house?
Yeah, they took all the trees down. The Union Army took down all the trees to use for wood, for camps, for railroad, hospitals, etc. And Anna Maria did a claim later on to get reimbursed for that, all that timber that was taken. She died before it reached the House of Representatives, which was very much debating as to whether Lee's children would get benefits for this property, which they did not. They denied them. So,
very interesting story, Mary. Thank you. Christopher?
Well, my favorite Fairfax County history tidbit is that Fairfax County was the filming location for a silent movie in 1924. The Ford Motor Company, in conjunction with the Bureau of Public Roads, which, believe it or not, at that time was part of the Department of Agriculture, they produced a film, essentially a propaganda film, to encourage communities to pass road bonds in order to have good roads. The idea was that good roads, people could get to school more easily, people could transport goods to various locations, and so Ford was looking for a place that had just awful, atrocious roads, and turns out Fairfax County was the location they chose.
Oh my goodness. That's not much of a commentary on it.
It isn't. But it just had atrocious, muddy roads, and in fact, while they were filming here, a Army truck lighting plant that was used to film the movie actually got stuck in these muddy roads. But they chose Fairfax County, and in order to avoid offending the local populace in this silent movie, they called it Clay County. So no references to Fairfax, but we see a lot of very well-known Fairfax locations, such as the Fairfax Courthouse, the City Hall, Town Hall, Old Town Hall, which is in Fairfax.
So it was not a very well-kept secret.
It was not. In fact, there was only one paid actor in the movie. Everyone else, the whole entire cast, was Fairfax County citizens. So the local teacher, there was the local doctor, they all made appearances in this movie. And the movie basically follows the story of Robert Preston, who is this farm boy. He grows up and it follows his struggles with the roads in the county. He's trying to take his father's eggs. His father's a farmer, so he's trying to take his eggs to the station, but the roads make the carriage get stuck and all the eggs fall off and he misses the train. various scenarios like that. And so his teacher recognizes how passionate he is about good roads, and she encourages him to apply to the Harvey Firestone Scholarship, which will award him 4 years of a scholarship to study, but he has to write a good roads essay. So he writes this very passionate essay about how important good roads are and what they'll mean to the community, and he gets awarded the scholarship, and President Calvin Coolidge actually makes a cameo in the film.
He does.
Which is really interesting. And so he goes off to study civil engineering, and while that is happening, the county that he's from passes a good roads bond, and he eventually comes back a hometown hero and paves the roads, and Fairfax County, or Clay County as it is referred to, becomes a booming area. So really fascinating. The citizens were all excited to be a part of this film, and for many years it was actually lost. It was released in March 1924. It was a really popular film. It was given to all of the Ford dealerships in the United States. 2 copies were given to each dealership, and it proved so popular that each dealership requested additional copies. And it was even sent to other countries. It was translated and sent to Mexico, South America, and Europe. So Fairfax County was seen in 1924 all over the world, which is really, really cool. But as I said, it was lost for many years. The citizens always remembered being in it, and in the 1940s or 50s they wrote a letter to Ford. The guy who saved Sully Plantation, Eddie Wagstaff, sent a letter to the Ford Motor Company asking them to get a copy of this film. Ford responded saying that it was really deteriorated, they weren't really sure where it wasn't cataloged, so they couldn't get a copy. So many years later, in the 1960s, there was an article in the Washington Evening Star that mentioned that the Ford Motor Company donated all of their movies to the National Archives. And so Stacy Sherwood, who was a big mover and shaker in the city of Fairfax, wrote a letter to the National Archives and asking to see this film. And they got a very similar answer that Ford gave them, that, oh, we just got all of these films, they're very deteriorated, nothing's cataloged, we don't know what's what, but we'll let you know if we find it. And so a couple years later, they did notify the city of Fairfax that they did find this film, and they invited Stacy Sherwood, Eddie Wagstaff, all of these big movers and shakers in Fairfax to view this film, and sure enough, it was the film they had been looking for. And unfortunately, over many years, the film had deteriorated because it was on fragile nitrate film stock. But most of the film, about 20 minutes survived, and the story is pretty well, you could follow it.
Have you seen it?
I have seen it. You can actually view it at the Fairfax Museum and Visitor Center. They have it playing on loop there, and
you need to give the title.
Yes, it's called The Road to Happiness. Oh my goodness, I forgot the title. The Road to Happiness. That is what it's called. It's also on YouTube. Just YouTube.
Oh, it is.
It is. It's Road to Happiness, Fairfax. YouTube that, and it'll be the first video on there.
Okay, that should be fun. And if there are, the courthouse and other Fairfax County locations, that would be kind of fun to watch.
Yes, it's very interesting to see how the county has changed and see this rural landscape.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, a lot of us who remember Virginia in the 40s and 50s, the roads, when you got back in the, not very far back, it was very, very primitive. I mean, little, tiny, narrow, curving roads. Mm-hmm. Those were the